Greetings. I hope you're doing well. Ready for another video. This starts a new series looking at fixed assets. Today is sort of to get us oriented about the fixed assets. I would like to go over what we're going to be covering in the videos. The life cycle of the fixed assets are you acquire the fixed asset, then you depreciate it, and then you dispose of it. And so we've got to have videos that cover all three of those, and probably we'll have a few on what you do when you acquire a fixed asset, one video on what to do when you're recording the monthly depreciation, and then a video on disposals. Then we'll have another video on special features of the fixed asset module, and then finally a video on how to fix problems in the asset register. 4 or 5 videos is adequate for what we're doing right now. We have 3 bases we have to touch when we're acquiring the fixed asset, or if you might want to look at it as 4. We have to be able to make the right journal entry to acquire. That we've already covered in plenty of videos, but we're going to make sure there's a video in this module that covers what are the journal entries. Every time you debit a fixed asset account, equipment or buildings, you have to also record the fixed asset in the asset module. Whenever you record an asset in the asset module, you also have to set up the depreciation presets that instruct how depreciation is to be done. So one way to look at it is that we have 3 bases to touch whenever we acquire a fixed asset. We have to make sure the entries are right, we have to make sure the asset is set up in the asset register, and we have to have the depreciation presets set up. So we'll look at our first video on how to do those 3 things. Those 2 things. So the first one with the accounting entries we've covered in other videos. We'll try to bring those videos into this folder so you can have something to look at. But just keep in mind, every time you debit fixed assets, you also have to debit the asset register. And it's very simple. And so let's get started. Right away, I could tell you that the heart of this whole process is right there with asset records. Everything springs from that. We set up the asset record, and in the process of setting up the asset record, we also set up the asset preset. Then monthly use the depreciation calculation right here, and then when we're done with the asset, we run the disposal. So it's a fairly simple process. Even though we have maybe 12 menu items here, those 3 are the heart of the entire process: asset records, depreciation calculation, and the disposal. Let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at the asset record. It is by far the most important of all of these functions under the asset register tab. This asset record is the heart of the whole process. We'll open that, and we're going to create a new asset. Our hypothetical class example is that we have purchased a laptop for $2,500 out of the operating fund, and so we're going to record that. And so the first step in recording a fixed asset is setting up the asset register. Very first step of that is setting the asset code. The asset codes start with the convention of start with the B if they're buildings, and E if they are equipment, and I if they're land improvements, L if they're land, R for residences, and V for vehicles. I think that pretty much covers the whole waterfront. It's important if you decide to create one of your own that you sort of know what you're doing, but clump everything together, and with one prefix at least you have some sort of system to whatever you've created. We are wanting to add a piece of equipment, and so we are currently at FA01, and so we want to create FA01. So we go over here and we go FA01. This is not automatically, they're not sequentially added. By the way, this asset asset code is not the same as the serial number of the asset used on an asset tag. It just gets too confusing to try to use those at this point. So it's sort of a doubling up, but not too big of a problem. And so this would be equivalent to the ER code for an employee, or the WHO code, or the org ID. Well, this is the asset code. And so it's going to ask us now if we want to create it, and we say yes. And we type in the description, a Toshiba laptop, and the lookup code could be Toshiba if you wanted that, and then you could have a different setup for short heading. Anything that you want would be fine. We now have to pick the asset class. We have in our standard rollout now the asset class. This is going to pre-populate things based on the values that go with that class. And so these are the classes that we've sort of come up with, and they match the accounting manual as the different lives that are recommended by the accounting manual. Of course, if you have a different world because of the legal environment you're in, you might want to change this so it matches your environment. But we are looking here 5-year equipment. I'm choosing for our laptop, and you can see that it is going to pre-populate some values for me. And so I'm continuing just working down each of the empty fields. Let's buy this in 2001//2013 is the first period of depreciation. And you have a choice here of either putting the base percentage or the start and ending period for depreciation. We're depreciating this over 5 years. Remember, it's a 5-year life, and so that would be 20% a year. 1 divided by 5 is 20%. All of the possible conceivable depreciation methods are available and doable. We have this set up so the business rules are sort of feeding it towards straight line, but if you need one of these because of government requirements, then we can help you modify it so those would work. As I was saying earlier, in the theoretical notion, set a start period and end period, or you could set up a depreciation amount. We think this combination right here is a much more logical way to do it. So we're setting up a start period and how much to depreciate each year. And then we're going to choose currency code here of whatever your currency is. You have to choose this even if you're multi-currency. You don't need to put anything in here unless you want to. Base final value, if you've got a residual value in mind of what it will be worth after the 5 years, you could put it in there. I've not seen that too much in the Adventist world, but at least in your accounting textbook, the concept of a residual value is real. As we go down this screen, this fields here are never populated by you, but they will be populated by the transactions as you record them. So as you record transactions connected to this asset, the cost and the accumulated depreciation will populate there, leaving you the book value. This is very helpful if you want to know the status of any of your assets. You'll come over here. We will come back and look at this several times in the course of our presentations to understand this. When we chose the asset class, our guys over in configuration have set this so these fields down here are automatically populated, but these are the depreciation accounts. This is the accumulated depreciation account right here for this type of asset, and this is the depreciation expense for these types of assets. This one would be depreciation expense dash equipment, and this would be accumulated depreciation dash equipment. You could see that you have the possibilities of changing the status, but the default is active. It leads us to what we have over here, and it's important to understand what these are over here and what they are not. These are classification codes available for you to help keep things straight with your assets. These are labels going on the fixed asset. These are not guiding the depreciation. Okay, this is all about ways to keep track of your fixed asset. For example, what department is holding the fixed asset? So we bought this by the Treasury Department, and they have the fixed asset. It is at their Burtonsville location. Your asset could have been given to one of your churches, the Central Washington Ghanaian Church. So you get the idea. It'll help you keep track. So if you've loaned it to one of your churches and you want to be able to keep track of what you you've loaned, then you would set up the org ID. If you didn't, then you just leave it blank. You may have given it to one of your employees, and so maybe Mitro there, Diaz, is the employee that has that cell phone or whatever piece of equipment it is, or laptop. So all of this is to help you keep track of your assets. However, they are available for filters and a Q&A report, but they don't have any function in any of the processes we're learning here. So just a way to tag and label the assets without going into a lot of functional changes because of what you put here. So you can put treasury or anything you want right here. Depreciation is not going there. That account's not being charged. That function's not being charged by that asset or taken out of their budget. Nothing like that. This is just labels, post-it notes, so to speak, that have been stuck onto that asset. And then one other thing, we can go through all the rest of these things, and you can see that these have carried over our values from the early page, so we don't need to make any changes there. We've got US dollars there chosen. Straight line, $20. Okay, value for depreciation, we need to choose that. Even if you're not multi-currency, you need to go through every one of these tabs, and any place the word currency shows up, choose your currency. Fundamentally, we have populated the fields that you could see here, and we ran over to 4 here and populated this one right there as well. So we've set up the record, and so we go OK, and we're going to get a warning message about setting up presets, which I'm going to explain to you in a minute. Before we go to presets, let's go over and look at asset notes. This would be note 1. We can have several of these notes I'm showing you on each one of our assets. Many of you won't even see the value of having one note, but let's look at it and see what we've got. So we've created this note, and here we could put in the serial number for the asset. This could be here, the tag off of your asset control tag that you put onto the piece of equipment. And here you could put all kinds of description, anything you could possibly imagine. Red chairs purchased for the president's office. Here we could put in every other year, have cleaning done, the actual address and employee. So you could see a lot of this over here is pre-set up and redundant from what we're trying to do on the other page. You could put the information about where you purchased it and the information about the purchase here, keeping track of your insurance on that asset, information about the disposal. These fixed asset records will continue to exist even after the disposal. This would be information helping you to explain the conditions of the disposal, you know, the provisions disposal, where did it go, who's got it, how much you got when you disposed of it. If you borrowed money to buy the asset, this would be a way you could keep track of that. And then user details is even more types of information you could keep that are very specific to who uses it during what period of time and so forth. Way more than most people are finding interesting. But at least I wanted to point out to you this idea of having the asset note where you can have all kinds of information on the asset. But we're not going to bother recording any on our class example, but I wanted to make sure you knew that it existed, a very powerful functionality. So we have set up the general information, and before we leave, we need to go ahead and set up the asset posting preset. The asset posting preset is guidance to the system on how to record depreciation expense. Let me remind you that depreciation expense, all expenses, are required in 5.4 to have fund, function, and restriction, and 6 to have fund, function, restriction, and resource. You can imagine when this program is going to be doing automatic depreciation, we need some way to tell what fund, function, and restriction needs to be posted to by the depreciation expense. And so whenever the automatic depreciation calculation is running, because you've set it up here, the program, Sun Plus, the Sun Systems program, goes and looks at your preset to determine how to post the expense. So let's go over and look at that. When you first go over here, it says it's not found. It says go to preset E0021, and when I didn't find it, this E0021 came over from the asset register, the one we just set up, and we need to set up a subcode. Well, let me explain to you what the main function of the page is, then you can understand those better. This is saying for this asset, charge 100% of the depreciation to this fund, this resource, this function, and this restriction. So if you wanted to split your depreciation between several different fund, resource, functions, or restrictions, you would set up several different subcodes. You'd set up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and each one of those subcodes you'd create where you wanted to go and what percentage of the depreciation goes to that one. We're setting up just one and saying 100% goes to this location. If for some crazy reason you want to split it between two functions or something, then you will set up two subcodes, essentially having two presets set up with two percentages here that equal 100%. But we, in 99.999 of the time, in fact, I've never seen anybody in the Adventist world do anything but just put a 1 right here and put in the factor of 1 right there, meaning all the depreciation is going to whatever you define down here. And so we're saying that yes, we want to create this asset code with this subcode, and we want 100% of the depreciation to go to these locations. All depreciation goes to Fund 20. And if you remember the plant fund presentations made earlier, practically the only expense in Fund 20 is the depreciation expense. In version 6, you have to identify a resource. The resource is UFIN, and that is the invested in plant resource. That will be the proper resource. Here we have a little bit of room for thinking. According to the accounting manual, the depreciation expense should be charged to the function that is using the asset. In our case here, Treasury is using the laptop, and so we are going to charge depreciation to the Treasury Department. I will tell you that there's some discussion about it. Many organizations just charge it all to one function. However, to give you some thought, we want by our accounting to be able to explain how much a function is costing us. So how much are we spending on Sabbath school? Well, we need to be able to include depreciation in that answer. Many departments it won't make any difference, but usually evangelism has a lot of equipment, and so does the IT department. How much are we spending on the IT department? Well, if we don't include depreciation in that answer, then we're not giving a proper picture of the cost situation of our organization. So I personally am a big fan of changing the function code so the expense is going to the department that is using the asset, so we have all of the costs of running that department. And then the restriction is almost always zero. I can't imagine a case where the restriction is not zero. And so this is basically saying for this asset, charge 100% of the depreciation to those values there. That's the end of setting up the asset. That will be this video now. The next video is the entry to record purchasing of the asset.